The morning sun rose over Nexer Prime, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The Galactic Military Academy stood like a mountain of steel and glass, home to the finest warriors from 100 different worlds. Every year, thousands of young beings arrived here to train, to learn, and to become soldiers worthy of protecting the galaxy. In the administrative building, a valiant clerk named Torux was having a very bad day. He had been working for 16 hours straight, processing cadet assignments with tired eyes and shaking hands. His species needed only 4 hours of sleep per cycle, but even they had limits. Torux rubbed his 3 eyes and looked at his screen. Another file. Another assignment. He typed quickly, eager to finish his shift. He did not notice that he had entered the wrong code. The file belonged to a human girl named Lily Patterson. She was 17 years old, small and thin, with brown hair that she kept in a simple ponytail. Back on Earth, she had been the top student in her class at the Pacific Institute for Alien Studies. She had learned to speak 6 different alien languages before her 16th birthday. The Galactic Military Academy had recruited her for their diplomatic program, where she would learn to negotiate peace between warring species. But Torux's tired fingers had typed the wrong number. Instead of the diplomatic track, he had assigned her to something called Predator Class. Lily knew nothing about this mistake when her transport ship landed on Nexer Prime. She walked through the spaceport with wide eyes, amazed by everything she saw. There were tall Druvan warriors with skin like gray stone. There were quick Silaxians who seemed to disappear into shadows. There were Corthony soldiers covered in green scales, their claws clicking against the metal floor. She had studied all these species in her books, but seeing them in person was something else entirely. They were so big, so powerful, so different from the humans she had grown up with. She felt very small standing among them, but also very excited. This was the beginning of her dream. A small robot guided her to her dormitory assignment. She followed it through long hallways and across wide courtyards, taking in the sights of the academy. Training fields stretched as far as she could see. Combat arenas echoed with the sounds of fighting. Weapons ranges crackled with energy blasts. Finally, the robot stopped in front of a large building made of dark metal. The number 7 was painted on the door in faded red letters. Barrack 7, the robot announced. Predator track, please enter. Lily frowned. Predator track? That did not sound right. But maybe the diplomatic program was housed together with the combat programs. She was new here. She did not understand how things worked yet. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The room was large and dim, filled with rows of metal bunks. The air smelled strange, like copper and sweat and something wild that she could not name. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she began to see the other cadets. Her heart stopped. They were monsters. That was her first thought, though she knew it was unkind. A dozen Corthony warriors sat on their bunks, their reptilian eyes reflecting what little light there was. Their claws were as long as her fingers, curved and sharp like knives. In the far corner, 4 Druvan cadets were arm wrestling, their massive bodies making the floor shake with each movement. And in the shadows along the walls, she could see the glowing eyes of Silaxians, watching her like cats watching a mouse. Every single one of them was built for killing. Every single one of them was staring at her. The room went completely silent. Lily swallowed hard. She clutched her duffel bag tightly against her chest, suddenly aware of how soft and fragile she must look to these creatures. Her legs wanted to run. Her brain screamed at her to leave. But she forced herself to stay still. "Hello," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "I think I am your new bunkmate?" No one answered. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. Lily could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then one of the Corthony stood up. He was huge, nearly 7 feet tall, with scales the color of dark emeralds. A long scar ran across his face, from his forehead to his jaw. He walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate and threatening. "You are lost, little one," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "This is Predator class. Only the strongest species train here. You do not belong." Lily checked her assignment pad again. The screen clearly showed Barrack 7, Predator track. "There must be some mistake," she agreed. "But this is where they told me to go. Maybe I can sort it out in the morning?" The administrative office was closed when I arrived. The Courtney leaned down until his face was level with hers. His breath was hot and smelled of raw meat. His yellow eyes studied her like she was something to eat. "You will not survive until morning," he said quietly. "The training here is designed for predators, for hunters, for killers, not for soft pink creatures like you. If you stay, you will die." Lily felt fear crawling up her spine. Everything this alien said was probably true. She could see the power in his body, the deadliness in his claws. Compared to him, she was nothing, less than nothing. But she had traveled for 3 months to reach this place. She had left behind her family, her friends, her entire world. She had worked her whole life for this opportunity. And she was not going to run away on her first day just because someone told her she did not belong. "I appreciate the warning," she said, keeping her voice steady. "But until the paperwork is fixed, I will stay where I was assigned." "Which bunk is mine?" The Courtney stared at her. Behind him, the other predators exchanged confused glances. None of them had ever seen anything like this before. Prey animals ran. Prey animals begged. They did not ask about sleeping arrangements. After a long moment, the Courtney pointed to an empty bunk in the corner. It was the smallest one, right next to a window that let in cold air from outside. "There," he said. "But do not expect to use it for long. By tomorrow, you will be gone, one way or another." Lily nodded politely and walked to her bunk. She could feel dozens of predator eyes following her every step. She set down her bag, sat on the thin mattress, and looked around at the room full of monsters who expected her to die. She was terrified. She was alone. She was completely out of her depth. But she was also human. And humans, as the galaxy would soon learn, did not give up easily. She lay down on her bunk and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be difficult. Tomorrow would probably be painful. But tomorrow was still hours away. For now, she would rest. She would need her strength. The alarm sounded at 4 in the morning. It was not a gentle sound. It was a scream of metal and noise that tore Lily from her sleep like a hand grabbing her throat. She sat up in her bunk, heart racing, eyes wide with confusion. All around her, the predator cadets were already moving. They jumped from their beds with practiced ease, pulling on their training uniforms and heading for the door. None of them looked tired. None of them complained. This was normal for them. Lily scrambled to follow. Her hands shook as she put on her clothes. Her legs felt weak beneath her. She had not slept well. Strange noises had filled the barracks all night. Growls and snarls and the sound of claws scraping against metal. She had lain awake for hours, too afraid to close her eyes. But now it was morning, and there was no time for fear. She ran outside with the others and found herself standing in a massive training yard. The ground was made of hard-packed dirt, stained dark in places that she did not want to think about. High walls surrounded the yard on all sides, covered with climbing holds and rope ladders. In the center stood a raised platform where a single figure waited. Instructor Gracker was a Druvan, one of the largest Lily had ever seen. He stood over 8 feet tall, with arms as thick as tree trunks and skin the color of storm clouds. His face was covered in scars, some old and faded, others still fresh and pink. He wore a uniform that strained against his massive chest, decorated with medals and symbols that Lily did not recognize. He looked at the assembled cadets with cold, hard eyes. Then those eyes found Lily, and they stopped. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like anger. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice booming across the yard. Lily stepped forward. Her legs were shaking, but she forced them to carry her. "Cadet Patterson reporting for training, sir," she said. Gracker looked down at his datapad, then back at her. His jaw tightened. "There has been a mistake," he said. "You are human. You do not belong in Predator class." "I understand, sir. The administrative office was closed yesterday. I was told to report to training as assigned and fix the paperwork later." Gracker made a sound deep in his throat. It might have been a laugh, or it might have been a growl of frustration. "Very well," he said. "You will participate in today's training. Try not to die before we can send you somewhere more appropriate." The training began. The first exercise was a run. Not a simple jog around a track, but a 30-kilometer sprint through the toxic swamps that surrounded the academy. The air was thick with poisonous gases that burned the lungs. The water was filled with creatures that hunted by sensing movement and body heat. The path was narrow, muddy, and full of hidden dangers. The Predator cadets took off at incredible speed. The Corthony ran on all fours, their powerful legs driving them forward like missiles. The Silaxians seemed to flow through the swamp like shadows, barely touching the ground. Even the massive Druvan moved with surprising grace, their heavy feet finding solid ground where there should have been none. Lily ran too. She ran as fast as she could, which was not very fast at all. Within minutes, she was alone. The other cadets had disappeared into the swamp ahead of her, leaving her to face the dangers by herself. The first attack came from below. Something grabbed her ankle and pulled her down into the murky water. She screamed, thrashing wildly, fighting to break free. The creature was strong, much stronger than her, but she managed to kick it in what she hoped was a sensitive spot. It let go, and she pulled herself onto solid ground, gasping for air. The second attack came from above. A flying thing with too many wings and teeth like needles dove at her face. She ducked just in time, feeling it pass through the space where her head had been. The third attack nearly killed her. A sinkhole opened beneath her feet, swallowing her up to her chest in thick, sucking mud. She struggled and fought, but the more she moved, the deeper she sank. Panic filled her mind. She was going to die here, alone in an alien swamp, and no one would even know. But then something inside her refused to give up. She forced herself to calm down. She remembered her lessons from survival training on Earth. Stop moving. Spread your weight. Reach for something solid. Slowly, painfully, she pulled herself out of the sinkhole. It took 40 minutes. By the time she was free, she was covered in mud, and her arms felt like they were on fire. She finished the run 2 hours after the last cadet. When she crossed the finish line, Instructor Gracker was waiting there with his arms crossed. "You are still alive," he said. It was not a compliment. It was an observation. "Yes, sir." Lily gasped. The afternoon brought combat training. The cadets were paired off for sparring matches. Lily was matched against a Silaxian named Chris, a female hunter with skin that seemed to shift colors in the light. Her eyes glowed softly in the shadow of the training hall. "I will try not to hurt you too badly," Chris said. Her voice was soft, almost kind. "But you should know that I have never lost a match." The fight began. Lily never saw the first strike. One moment she was raising her fists in a defensive stance. The next moment she was on her back, staring at the ceiling, with Chris's foot pressed against her throat. "Yield," Chris said. "I yield," Lily whispered. Chris stepped back and turned to walk away. The fight was over. It had lasted perhaps 4 seconds, but then Lily said something that made Chris stop. Again. Chris turned around slowly. Her glowing eyes studied Lily with new interest. "What did you say?" "Again," Lily repeated, climbing to her feet. "I want to fight again." The second fight lasted 6 seconds. Lily managed to block one strike before Chris put her down. "Again," Lily said, spitting blood from a split lip. The third fight lasted 8 seconds. The fourth lasted 11. The fifth lasted 14. By the end of the training session, Lily had fought Chris 17 times. She had lost all 17. Her face was swollen and bruised. Her ribs ached with every breath. One of her eyes was nearly shut from the swelling, but each time she had lasted a little longer. Each time she had learned something new about how Chris moved, how she attacked where she was weakest. Instructor Gracker watched from across the training hall. He did not say anything, but there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. Something like interest, something like doubt. That night, Lily limped back to her bunk and collapsed onto the thin mattress. Every part of her body hurt. She had never been so exhausted in her entire life, but she was still here. She had survived the first day. Tomorrow would be harder. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pain, new reasons to quit. But tomorrow was tomorrow. For now, she had proven one thing. She would not break easily. The predators would have to try harder than this. Days turned into weeks. The paperwork error remained UNFIX ED. Every morning, Lily woke with the other cadets. Every morning, she ran through swamps and climbed walls and fought opponents who could kill her with a single blow. Every night, she crawled back to her bunk, barely able to move, and studied until she fell asleep. She was still the weakest. She was still the slowest. She still lost every fight. But something was changing. It started small. During the morning runs, she began to notice patterns in the swamp. She learned which paths were safest. She learned which creatures hunted at which times. She learned how to move quietly through the water without attracting attention. Her finishing times improved. Not by much, but enough that the other cadets noticed. In combat training, she stopped trying to match her opponents in strength and speed. Instead, she began to watch them. She studied how they moved, how they breathed, how they balanced their weight. She noticed things that others missed. Courtney warriors, for all their power, had a blind spot directly below their chins. Their neck scales were softer there, and a strike to that point could stun them. Druven soldiers became sluggish when they got cold. Their joints could be temporarily locked if hit at exactly the right angle. Silexians, despite their incredible speed, had trouble adjusting to sudden changes in light. A bright flash could blind them for half a second. Lily wrote everything down in a small notebook. She memorized weaknesses and techniques. She practiced movements over and over until they became automatic. The other cadets began to watch her differently. One evening, Vexer found her in the common room. He was the scarred Courtney who had warned her on her first night. He sat down across from her, his massive body making the chair creak under his weight. "Why do you stay?" he asked. His voice was rough but curious. "You could leave. You could ask for a transfer. No one would blame you." Lily looked up from her notebook. Her face still showed bruises from that afternoon's training. "Would you leave?" she asked. Vexer's claws clicked against the table. "That is different. I am Courtney. I was born to fight. And I am human," Lily said. "Where I come from, we were not born to do anything. We had to learn everything. How to hunt. How to build. How to survive when everything around us was trying to kill us." She smiled, even though it hurt. "We are good at learning." Vexer stared at her for a long time. Something shifted in his yellow eyes. Then, without speaking, he reached over and adjusted her notebook. He corrected a diagram she had drawn of Courtney combat techniques. "Your stance is wrong here," he said gruffly. "If you are going to learn, you should learn correctly." After that night, things began to change. Word spread through the barracks that Vexer was helping the human. At first, the other cadets were confused. Why would a proud Courtney warrior waste time on such a weak creature? But Vexer did not explain himself, and no one dared to question him. Then Chris started helping too. She appeared in the training hall one evening when Lily was practicing alone. Without saying anything, she began to demonstrate proper footwork for dodging attacks. She showed Lily how to read an opponent's body language, how to predict where the next strike would come from. "You will never be fast enough to outrun me," Chris said. "But you can learn to see me coming. That is something." A Druvan cadet named Horgan joined next. He was smaller than most of his kind, only 7 feet tall, but he knew exercises that could strengthen a body beyond its natural limits. He taught Lily stretches and movements designed for species from low-gravity worlds. "Your bones are fragile," he explained, "but your muscles can grow. Your endurance can improve. You just have to work harder than everyone else." Lily worked harder. She woke earlier than the other cadets and trained before the morning alarm. She stayed later in the training halls, practicing techniques until her body could perform them without thinking. She ate carefully, choosing foods that would fuel her training rather than slow her down. The weeks continued to pass. On the 17th day, something remarkable happened. It was a regular sparring session. Lily was matched against a young Courtney cadet named Scare. He was half the size of Vexer, still growing into his scales, but he was fast and eager to prove himself. The fight began like all of Lily's fights. Scare charged forward, claws extended, expecting an easy victory. He had watched the human lose dozens of matches. He expected this one to end the same way, but Lily did not try to block or run. Instead, she did something unexpected. She stepped forward, directly into his attack. Scar's claws passed over her shoulder, missing by inches. Before he could adjust, Lily struck upward with her palm, hitting the soft spot beneath his chin. His head snapped back. She followed with a knee to the weak point of his joint, exactly as Vexer had taught her. Scare crashed to the ground. The training yard went completely silent. Lily stood over the fallen Courtney, breathing hard, fists raised. Her whole body was shaking. She could not believe what had just happened. Neither could anyone else. Instructor Gracker stood frozen at the edge of the yard. His datapad hung forgotten in his massive hand. In 37 years of training predators, he had never seen a human defeat a Courtney in single combat. Scare looked up from the ground. His eyes were wide with shock. Not with pain, but with pure disbelief. How? He whispered. Lily extended her hand to help him up. After a moment of hesitation, he took it. "I learned," she said simply. Someone in the crowd muttered that it was a lucky strike, that the human had caught Scare by surprise, that it would never happen again. But Lily was already turning to face her next opponent. Her stance was correct. Her breathing was controlled. Her eyes were sharp and focused. It was not luck. It was something far more dangerous. It was the result of 17 days of failure, 17 days of pain, 17 days of refusing to quit. It was humanity's greatest gift, the ability to learn, to adapt, to become whatever was needed to survive. That night, no one called her the weak one. No one called her the soft creature. No one suggested that she should leave. For the first time, the predators looked at Lily Patterson and saw something they recognized. They saw a hunter. The news spread through the academy like fire through dry grass. A human had defeated a Courtney in single combat. Not through trickery, not through weapons. Through pure skill and technique. It should have been impossible. For over a century, The Galactic Military Academy had divided species into categories. There were predator species, those who had evolved as hunters and fighters. There were prey species, those who had survived through speed or hiding or numbers. And there were diplomatic species, those who were too weak for combat but useful for other purposes. Humans had always been classified as diplomatic. They were small. They were soft. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. They were physically weaker than almost every other species in the known galaxy. The Academy had recruited them only for their ability to learn languages and understand cultures. But now a human had knocked down a Courtney warrior, and the old classification suddenly seemed very wrong. Council member Vara called an emergency meeting. She was a Silaxian diplomat who oversaw relations between all the species at the Academy. Her job was to keep the peace, to make sure that the different peoples worked together without conflict. But this situation threatened to upset everything. Representatives from every major species gathered in the council chamber. The room was huge, built to hold beings of all sizes. Druvan ambassadors sat in reinforced chairs that could support their weight. Silaxian diplomats watched from the shadows along the walls. Courtney generals stood in clusters, their scales bristling with agitation. "This is an outrage," declared Ambassador Torak of the Courtney Empire. He was old and covered in battle scars, his voice thick with anger. "The human must have cheated. There is no other explanation. Our warriors are the finest fighters in the galaxy. A soft creature could never defeat one fairly." "Our monitoring systems recorded the entire match," Vara replied calmly. "There was no cheating. Cadet Patterson won through superior technique and tactical planning." "Impossible," Torak snarled. "Humans are weaklings. They are classified as non-combat capable. Everyone knows this. Perhaps everyone was wrong." Vara activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. Images began to appear, showing humanity's history on their homeworld. "When we first encountered humans," she said, "we made assumptions based on their physical appearance. We saw that they were small and fragile compared to predator species. We saw that they lacked natural weapons. We concluded that they were not dangerous." The images showed early humans on the plains of Africa, chasing prey across vast distances. But we failed to understand how they survived on their world. Humans evolved as persistent hunters. They could not outrun their prey. They could not overpower it. So instead, they followed it. For hours. For days. They tracked animals until those animals collapsed from exhaustion. Then they killed them. More images appeared. Humans building shelters. Creating tools. Developing weapons. They were not born with claws, so they made knives. They were not born with armor, so they made shields. They were not born with fangs, so they made spears. Everything they lacked, they created. The display showed humans surviving ice ages, crossing oceans, building cities that reached toward the sky. Their planet tried to kill them many times. Disasters, diseases, wars against each other. And every time, they adapted. They learned. They refused to die. Vara turned to face the assembled representatives. "We classified humans as non-combatants because they lack natural weapons. But we forgot that their greatest weapon is not something they are born with. It is something they develop. Given enough time, humans will find a way to overcome any obstacle, any enemy, any challenge." Ambassador Torak slammed his fist against the table. "This is ridiculous. One human won one fight against one young warrior. That proved nothing. Then observe her progress over the coming months," Vara suggested. "If I am wrong, she will fail. If I am right, we will need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about human potential." The debate continued for hours. The Courtney demanded that Lily be expelled. The Druvan called for an investigation. The Silaxians suggested waiting and watching. No agreement was reached. Meanwhile, Lily knew nothing about any of this. She was in the training yard, practicing the techniques Vexer had taught her. Her movements were slow and careful as she worked through each form. Strike to the soft spot. Knee to the joint. Turn and prepare for the next opponent. She did not know that her single victory had caused a crisis in the Academy's leadership. She did not know that representatives from a dozen species were arguing about her future. She only knew that tomorrow would bring more training, more pain, more chances to fail or succeed. Instructor Gracker watched her from the entrance to the yard. He had been a warrior his entire life. He had fought in 12 major battles and killed more enemies than he could count. He had trained thousands of cadets, all of them from predator species, all of them born with the instincts and tools for combat. But watching this small human girl practice in the fading light, he felt something strange. Something he had not experienced in many years. Uncertainty. He had been so sure that she would fail. Everyone had been sure. The question had never been whether she would break, only how quickly. Days, they had thought. Hours, perhaps. Instead, she had survived. She had adapted. She had learned, and Gracker was beginning to suspect that she was only getting started. He thought about his own training, decades ago on his homeworld. He remembered the older warriors who had pushed him, challenged him, forced him to grow stronger. He remembered how it felt to transform from a young cadet into a true soldier. Could the same thing happen to a human? The idea seemed crazy. Everything he knew about biology and evolution said it was impossible. Humans were too weak, too slow, too fragile to compete with predator species. But Lily Patterson had already done the impossible once. Maybe she would do it again. Gracker turned and walked back into the academy. Behind him, Lily continued to practice, her shadow stretching long across the training yard as the sun set over. Nexer Prime. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She would be ready. 6 months had passed since Lily Patterson first walked into Barrack 7. The academy had changed around her. Or perhaps she had changed, and the academy had simply adjusted to match. Either way, things were very different now. The administrative error had never been corrected. Not because anyone had forgotten, but because the Academy Council had decided to leave her exactly where she was. They wanted to see how far she could go. They wanted to know if a human could truly compete with predator species. Now they had their answer. Lily stood in the training yard, where her journey had begun. The morning sun was bright overhead, and the air smelled of dust and sweat. Around her, 43 cadets stood in formation. Courtney warriors with their gleaming scales, Druvan soldiers with their mountain-like bodies, Silaxian hunters with their glowing eyes, and one small human girl who had learned to stand among them as an equal. She was still the smallest cadet in Predator class. She was still the weakest in terms of raw strength. In pure physical tests, measuring speed and power and endurance, she ranked dead last. But in actual combat simulations, she was ranked third out of 43 of the deadliest young warriors in the galaxy. She had achieved this not by becoming stronger than her opponents. That was impossible. Instead, she had become smarter. She analyzed every enemy with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. She identified weaknesses that other cadets missed. She developed techniques specifically designed to neutralize the advantages of larger, faster, more powerful species, and she never stopped learning. Every day brought new lessons. Every defeat taught her something valuable. Every victory showed her what was possible. Instructor Gracker stepped onto the raised platform at the center of the yard. His scarred face was unreadable as he looked out at his cadets. These were the finest young warriors he had ever trained. In a few weeks, They would graduate and begin their careers as soldiers of the Galactic Alliance. But first, there was one more ceremony to complete. In 37 years, Gracker said, his voice carrying across the yard, I have trained some of the finest warriors this galaxy has ever seen. Soldiers who became legends. Leaders who changed history. I have watched thousands of cadets come and go, and I have learned to recognize true potential when I see it. He paused, letting his words sink in. When Cadet Patterson arrived 6 months ago, I thought the Academy had made a terrible mistake. I expected her to die within days. I was ready to write my resignation letter in protest. A few cadets laughed quietly. They remembered those early days too. They remembered the tiny human who had stumbled through swamps and lost every fight. They remembered thinking she would not last a week. I was wrong, Gracker continued. The Academy had not made a mistake. They had given me a gift, a chance to witness something that happens once in a generation. He gestured for Lily to step forward. She did, her posture straight, her head held high. 6 months ago, she had walked into this yard terrified and alone. Now she walked with the confidence of a warrior who had earned her place. Cadet Patterson has taught me that our old ways of thinking are outdated, Gracker said. For centuries, we divided species into categories: predators and prey, fighters and diplomats, those who could survive combat and those who could not. We were fools. He looked directly at Lily. The true division is not between strong and weak. It is between those who give up and those who do not. Cadet Patterson never gave up. Not when she was beaten. Not when she was exhausted. Not when everyone told her she would fail. She simply refused to quit. Gracker reached into his uniform and pulled out a small medal. It was silver, shaped like a stylized claw. Lily recognized it immediately. It was the Predator's mark, the highest honor that could be given to a cadet in this program. Only the finest warriors ever received it. On behalf of the Galactic Military Academy, Gracker said, I award Cadet Lily Patterson the Predator's mark. May she carry it with honor. He stepped forward and pinned the medal to her uniform. The silver gleamed in the sunlight dot around her. The other cadets responded. Corthany, Druvan, Salaxian, all of them pounded their fists against their chests in the traditional warrior's salute. The sound echoed across the training yard like thunder. Vexer stepped forward from the formation. His scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. We called you Soft One when you arrived, he said. We were wrong. You are harder than any of us. You simply hide it beneath your skin. Chris emerged from the shadows beside her, moving silently as always. The galaxy will learn to fear humans, she said quietly. I am glad I learned it first, as a friend rather than an enemy. Horgan the Druvan nodded his massive head. You have earned your place among us, he rumbled. No one can ever take that away. Lily looked around at the predators who had become her family. She thought about the girl who had walked into barracks 6 months ago. That girl had been so naive, so unprepared, so completely outmatched. She had not understood what she was getting into, but she had also been human dot, and humans, as the galaxy was learning, were something special. They were not the strongest. They were not the fastest. They were not the most naturally gifted. But they had something that other species lacked. They had the ability to become whatever they needed to be. Put a human in any situation, and given enough time, they would adapt. They would learn. They would overcome. It did not matter how impossible the challenge seemed. It did not matter how many times they failed. They would keep trying until they succeeded. That was the true strength of humanity. Not muscle or speed or claws, but pure stubborn determination to survive. Somewhere in the Academy's administrative system, Lily's file still listed her as a xenolinguistics student. The original paperwork error had never been corrected. She was technically still assigned to the diplomatic program, but nobody cared about paperwork anymore. Miracle Girl had earned her place among the predators, and this was only the beginning. Lily touched the metal on her chest and smiled. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers. There would be more challenges ahead, more enemies to face, more impossible situations to overcome. She was ready for all of it. After all, she was human. And humans never gave up.